Did he really just say that in front of everyone? The words rang in my ears long after the conference room emptied. 1 hour earlier, I'd been presenting Q4 retention growth when Barrett raised a hand sharp, impatient, and cut me off mid-sentence. Let's not waste time on minor contributors. It landed like a slap across my face. The silence that followed was louder than anything. Around the table, I saw eyes flick toward me, and then quickly away, the way people look at a car crash. They're too afraid to help. My cheeks flushed, but I didn't flinch. I capped my pen, closed my notes, and nodded. Fine. Let the storm pass. That's the thing you learn when you grow up around boardrooms. You survive by staying still in the moment that begs you to scream. I walked back to my office on the 21st floor, tucked behind glass walls that had once felt like a view of progress. Now they just felt like a cage. Outside, Seattle's skyline glistened under gray skies. Inside, I sat at my desk, my laptop humming quarterly spreadsheets, still glowing with the green cells I had built data that had saved the company from a second consecutive down quarter. I was deep in a projection model when the door slammed open behind me. No knock. Just the sudden crack of tension splitting the room in half. Barrett Quinn. His presence was loud even when he wasn't speaking, like the kind of man who believed interruption was a leadership skill. He strode across the room, tossed a thick folder onto my desk. It skidded across the surface and hit my coffee mug. Nova, we need to talk. Now my fingers tightened slightly around the edge of my desk, but my face stayed calm. Of course, I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. He didn't sit. The board has decided to restructure the leadership team. He said, his tone clipped and pre-rehearsed. We're moving in a new direction, and frankly, we need leaders, not analysts. People who inspire, not just execute, I blinked. You're letting me go, I said flatly. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Let's not be dramatic. You've been released, effective immediately. No acknowledgement of the retention numbers. No mention of the software I'd spent 6 months building with my team. Just him standing over me like I was a line item he couldn't wait to delete. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why I'd learned long ago how to carry silence like a shield. I see. I said, voice even. Steady, controlled, he hesitated. Maybe expecting a fight, then dropped the final blow. Your access ends at 5 p.m. HR has your exit documents, badge and laptop today. He turned on his heel and walked out. I sat there for a long time, not moving, not blinking, because something deeper than rage was settling inside me, something sharper. And Barrett, he had no idea what he'd just triggered. I didn't go out that night. No drinks, no tearful calls to old colleagues, no social media posts hinting at betrayal. I just went home, past the coffee shop. I used to stop by on late work nights, past the corner where my mom and I once waited in line to buy our first Orion Grid-branded solar lantern. My apartment wasn't big, but it was mine, simple, functional, a second-floor unit tucked above a bookstore that always smelled like cinnamon and ink. As I shut the door behind me, the silence was deafening. No Slack pings, no back-to-back meetings. Just the soft creak of floorboards and the distant hum of Seattle traffic drifting through the window. I hung up my coat, kicked off my heels, and walked to the corner of the living room, where I kept the things that still mattered. Photos, notebooks, and one framed picture I hadn't touched in months. It sat beside an old fern. I never watered properly. I picked it up carefully, brushing off the thin film of dust that had settled over the glass. There she was. My mother standing beneath a white banner that read, Orion Grid Launch Site 1. Clean power begins here. She was younger than I ever remembered her, wearing that same navy blue blazer she'd let me play dress-up with when I was 6. Her smile in the photo was wide, full of hope, and just a little worn at the edges, like someone who had been underestimated one too many times and still chose to show up anyway. She was gripping a pair of giant scissors in one hand, mid-cutting the ceremonial ribbon. Her other hand rested on my shoulder. Tiny 5-year-old me in oversized safety goggles, beaming up at her like she'd just invented the sun. Hi, Mom, I whispered, my voice catching just slightly. I carried the frame to my desk and sat down, opened the bottom drawer where I kept old paperwork and things I couldn't quite throw away. Tucked between a file labeled Old Contracts and a wrinkled product prototype sketch was a small velvet box. I opened it. Inside lay a tarnished bronze pin, my mother's old Orion Grid Founder's badge. The enamel was chipped on one corner. The back clasp was bent slightly, but the words still gleamed. Believe in builders, not just managers. She'd said it to me 100 times, sometimes after tough meetings, sometimes while braiding my hair before school. Managers count, she'd say, but builders change the game. I held the badge in my hand and leaned back, letting memory wash over me. There was one afternoon, maybe I was 10, when she took me into a lab filled with circuit boards and thermal units stacked like Lego bricks. She knelt beside me, picked up a small chip, and said, "This little thing. This controls how fast a battery learns." Feels simple, but it's everything, like people. Nova. The smallest things often hold the most power. That stayed with me. So had she. Now sitting alone in the dark, I wasn't sad the way people expected. There were no sobs, no shattered mugs. Just this ache that stretched quietly across my chest. The kind you don't run from because it's made of love and longing in equal measure. I closed the box, kissed the edge of the frame, and placed both next to my laptop. "Mom," I said softly. I tried, I really did. I ran my thumb over the photo one last time, her face lit by flash and faith. "And I'm not done yet." Barrett Quinn walked into Orion Grid, like a man who already owned it. It was 6 months after my mother's memorial, and the board was still trying to find its footing, searching, they said, for new direction, external perspective, and data-driven transformation. All the phrases that sounded good in press releases, but felt like knives when you'd grown up watching something built from scratch. He arrived on a rainy Thursday with a custom-tailored navy suit, a confident handshake that lingered just half a second too long, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The kind of smile that made people lean forward without realizing they were leaning in at all. He called his first town hall Vision Reimagined. I sat in the second row, hands folded in my lap, trying to keep my expression unreadable. The lights dimmed. A sleek slideshow flashed onto the giant monitor. Buzzwords danced across the screen in gleaming fonts. Agility, precision, market mastery. Then came the charts, the graphs, the inflated projections. Everything about the presentation was polished. Professional slick. He spoke with the ease of a seasoned politician, and the charm of someone who knew exactly when to laugh at his own joke. "I didn't come here to reinvent the wheel," he said at one point. "I came here to install rocket boosters on it." The room chuckled. I didn't. Behind the charisma, I could already sense the shift, the subtle replacement of substance with optics, strategy with theater. At first, it was small changes. Weekly metrics reports were now ranked publicly on a company dashboard color-coded for motivation. Senior engineers were invited to sunset their roles and replaced with shiny hires from companies that valued speed over soul, but then came the real cuts. People who'd been here since the first warehouse opened, who'd worked weekends, who'd soldered panels by hand when machines jammed, they began disappearing. One by one, names vanished from the org chart. And then Maya. Maya, who had once carried me on her hip through the hallways while my mom prepped for investor meetings. Who used to sneak me gum from her desk drawer and hug me tight when I was too tired to smile. Maya, who had been here longer than anyone but my mother. Barrett called it streamlining operations. I called it erasure. No farewell email. No send-off party. Just gone. When I asked HR what happened, they gave me a blank, bureaucratic shrug. She was offered an early retirement package. Standard procedure. I swallowed hard, nodded, and walked away. But that night, I stayed in the office long after everyone left. I stood by the mirror in the executive lounge, staring at myself under the white fluorescent lights. I wore a sharp black blazer, pressed slacks. Clean makeup, perfect posture. I looked the part, but I didn't feel it. All I saw was someone watching something precious get dismantled piece by piece and saying nothing. Because what could I say? Every time I opened my mouth in strategy meetings, Barrett would thank me for my input and pivot to someone louder. He'd reframe my ideas a week later as his own. He'd flash that politician's grin and the room would applaud. One morning, in a quarterly roadmap session, I brought up a model for long-term client retention based on usage data. He looked at me and said, "That's interesting, Nova. But let's remember, legacy doesn't win markets. Precision does." It was deliberate, calculated sharp enough to leave a mark without drawing blood. He wasn't just cutting jobs, he was cutting history, and I sat there mute. My fingers clenched under the table, my jaw locked tight, because I knew if I pushed too hard, I'd be next. Because I knew the board saw him as the future, and me as a footnote. Because I wasn't ready yet, but I would be. One day soon, the suit would fit for real. Not just on the outside, it was the project that should have changed everything. After 6 brutal months, countless nights spent under cold fluorescent lights, and more coffee than any of us should have consumed, we finally delivered the hybrid energy storage system. NovaCell, we called it a scalable self-regulating power unit that could adapt in real time to unpredictable usage surges. A mouthful on paper, a miracle in practice. It stabilized our pilot plants in Texas and Nevada. It slashed customer complaints by 43%. It reversed our falling Q2 into a record-breaking Q3. It saved us. But none of our names made it into the press release. Not mine, not Kevin's, who coded the adaptive AI from scratch. Not Priya's, who re-engineered the thermal layer. Not a whisper of the 23 people who bled into this launch. Instead, there was a party. Barrett called it a celebration of strategic excellence, hosted it in the glass-walled conference room on the 22nd floor. The one with the ridiculous skyline view. None of us ever had time to enjoy. Catered hors d'oeuvres, overpriced champagne, a fake string quartet in the corner. Everyone wore black and silver. We were all exhausted. I wore my war paint-tailored suit, low-bun lipstick that made me feel armored. My smile was tight, controlled, practiced. Barrett raised a crystal flute halfway through the night, his voice booming over the clinking glasses. "Let's take a moment to acknowledge what true leadership looks like," he said, making a sweeping gesture toward himself as if it were humility. "Success doesn't come from late nights or busy hands. It comes from sharp direction." I blinked. Not late nights. Not busy hands. Not the literal months my team spent rebuilding a broken infrastructure he didn't even understand. There it was, erasure served, chilled, the room clapped, someone whistled. I stood near the bar, fingers wrapped around a flute I hadn't sipped from. Lana, my closest friend at Orion Grid, stood 2 feet away next to Barrett. She smiled when he toasted. Lifted her glass, clinked it gently with his, and she didn't look at me. I wanted to believe she didn't see me, that she didn't know I was watching. But the truth sat heavy in my chest. She did know, and she looked away anyway. We had pulled each other through 2 layoffs, a product recall, and a near merger that almost gutted our department. We'd spent a weekend sleeping on the office floor during the NovaCell trial, passing energy bars and hope between each other. But tonight, she clinked glasses with the man who'd taken all the credit, and then she walked away. I stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cold and sharp. Below, the city buzzed in orange streaks and neon signs. My breath fogged against the glass railing. I pulled out my phone and opened the team group chat, one filled with jokes, late-night venting, and memes from burned-out engineers. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to say something. Anything a quiet. "We know what we did," or even a "thanks all of you," but I didn't type. Instead, I turned off the screen and looked up at the stars I could barely see, because I knew what this was. I knew the kind of hurt that came not from being criticized, but from being invisible. I knew what it felt like to give everything and watch someone else get handed the spotlight again. And I knew better than to fight for acknowledgement from someone who would never give it freely. That night I walked home. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked each step heavy with the weight of all we had built and all he had taken. But beneath the ache, something else stirred, a quiet resolve. This wasn't the end. It was only the part where I learned who was willing to stand beside me and who wasn't. I hadn't planned on doing anything special for my 30th birthday. After everything, after the launch, after the party, after Barrett's smug toast and Lana's silence, I didn't have it in me to celebrate. I'd taken the day off, the first in months. No calendar invites, no unread messages, just quiet. At 9:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. Mr. Harrington, my mother's lawyer, a man with a steady voice, an even steadier suit collection, and a habit of never calling unless it truly mattered. "Nova," he said gently. "Happy birthday. I know you weren't expecting this, but there's something here for you. From your mother, I think it's time." A strange chill moved through me. "Can you come in today?" he added. "It'll only take a few minutes." 20 minutes later, I was in a cab heading toward a quiet brick building in Belltown. Harrington's office was on the 3rd floor above a French bakery that always smelled like butter and nostalgia. I remembered coming here with my mom once when I was 13. She made me sit in the waiting room with a cocoa and a comic book while she signed papers in the back. I never asked what they were for. Now I was about to find out when I walked in. Harrington greeted me with that same calm, grandfatherly air. "You look like her today," he said softly. I offered a tired smile. Still trying. He led me to his office and slid a small box across the desk. Not the legal kind. Something more personal, Matt. Black, sealed in gold wax with a single initial. M, my mother's. With slightly trembling fingers, I broke the seal. Inside was a single envelope, ivory paper aged softly at the corners. My name was written in her handwriting. Nova. I sat down, opened it. Her voice was in every word. "If you're reading this, it means you've turned 30. And it also means the world hasn't always treated you fairly. I'm sorry for that. I always hoped you'd be seen for who you are. Brilliant, steady, full of light. But I knew there'd be moments when the people around you would choose not to see, when they'd overlook you, undervalue you, silence you. If that's happened, and I know it probably has, then I want you to read this next part carefully. Nova, even when they didn't see you. I did, I always did." That's when it broke. The tears came sharp, then fast, slipping down my cheeks in hot, silent waves. I didn't sob. I didn't make a sound. I just cried the way a dam finally gives way. Not from one crack, but from years of silent weight. I wiped my eyes and turned over the letter. Another piece of paper had been folded behind it, thicker. Legal Harrington placed a pen beside it, but I wasn't ready to touch it yet. "I waited 5 years to give you this," he said gently. "Your mother was clear. You weren't to see it until today." I unfolded the page. It was a trust transfer agreement. Effective immediately, 92% of Orion Grid shares would transition to me, held quietly, privately structured, to remain off the public record until I chose otherwise. I blinked once, twice, then read it again, and again you're saying My voice broke off. "Yes?" Harrington nodded. "You're not just a former department head. You're the controlling owner of Orion Grid." My breath caught. I wasn't just another name on a layoff list. I wasn't just the girl who got erased from a launch party speech. I was the company. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to breathe through the enormity of it. "She always knew," I whispered. Harrington smiled, his eyes kind. "She trusted your timing. She wanted you to see the truth on your own first. Who you could count on, who you couldn't. And once you had, that's when this was meant to reach you." I looked down at the signature at the bottom of the letter. Mara Quinn, founder. And just below it, a postscript in fading ink. "It's your table now. Nova. Sit tall." I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. And I wasn't done yet. I didn't rush. Not after the letter. Not after the trust papers. Not even after Harrington confirmed what I now held in my hands. 92% of Orion Grid, structured and airtight, untouchable, and waiting on my word. That kind of power demanded stillness. So I didn't scream, didn't blast it across inboxes or storm the office. That would have been too easy, too loud. No, I needed it quiet. Measured, surgical, like my mother would have done. 2 days after the letter, I sat across from Ilara Wren at a tiny cafe tucked into a sloping corner of Queen Anne Hill. The place didn't have a sign, just a hand-painted coffee cup on the window and a tiny chalkboard menu by the door. It was the kind of place you didn't find unless someone whispered it to you. Which was why I chose it. Ilara arrived in a gray wool coat, hair twisted into a severe bun. She had the kind of presence that didn't require raising her voice. People listened to her because she made them lean in. She slid into the seat across from me, ordered a black coffee, and waited. I handed her a manila folder. Copies of the trust documents. Digital access authorizations. A note from Harrington. She skimmed it in practiced silence, her fingers moving with legal precision. When she finished, she set the papers down, locked eyes with me, and said only one word. "Damn." I let a half-smile ghost across my lips. "You've seen worse." "I've seen Messier," she replied, "but not cleaner." "Not this." "Thorough." "Your mother didn't just plan for succession. She planned for war." I nodded slowly. She knew someone like Barrett might come. Ilara's brows arched. "You want him gone?" Eventually, I said, voice calm. "Even, but not yet." She tilted her head. "Not yet." I leaned forward, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic cup in front of me. "Let him think he's safe," I said. "Let him keep strutting across those meetings, feeding the board projections wrapped in marketing glitter. Let him keep using my systems, my people, my work. Let him decorate the ship with gold while the hull quietly rots." Her lips curved into something between respect and caution. "You're dangerous," she said softly. "I'm prepared," I corrected. There was a difference. She pulled out her tablet, opened her calendar. "What's the timeline?" "I want him blindsided," I said. "I want the boardroom silent when I speak. I want the floor to tilt beneath him while he's still mid-sentence." Ilara nodded. "We'll need 3 prep steps: validate voting control, pre-file the shareholder request, and prep documentation for leadership review." "All underway," I said. "Mr. Harrington is looping you in. Do you want to call the board now?" "No." A pause. Ilara's brow furrowed. "Nova, you could walk in tomorrow and fire the CEO with a signature. Why wait? Out the window where the sky hung." In that soft, muted gray, Seattle was famous for. Rain tapped the glass gently, like fingertips on a drum. Because timing, I said, is everything. Barrett's smart but arrogant. He's too confident to see a knife when it's quiet. I want him so sure of himself that he doesn't even look down until it's already bleeding. She sat back slowly, studying me like a chess master seeing the full board. "When you speak," she said, "it'll be a tsunami." "Exactly," I whispered. "And tsunamis don't come with warnings. They come with silence, and then they take everything." Ilara reached across the table, tapping the folder. "Once call me the minute you say the word, I will." I stood, slung my coat over one shoulder. Back on the street. I didn't rush. I didn't look over my shoulder. I walked down the hill with steady steps, the city beneath me glittering unknowingly. Because Barrett still thought he'd won. And nothing was more satisfying than watching a man build his empire. One lie at a time while standing on a trap he never saw. I knew he'd enjoy it. Barrett had always craved moments like this, controlled theatrical exits, where he could play both executioner and gentleman. The only surprise was that he waited until the end of the quarter. He called me into his office that morning. The message came without subject line, without explanation, just 10. "See you damn sharp. Bring your badge." I smiled when I read it. It was almost poetic how neatly he was stepping into the trap. I wore navy, my mother's favorite color, the same blazer I had on the day Novacell went live. I pulled my hair back, skipped the lipstick, and packed light one notepad. my laptop, and a ceramic mug the team had gifted me last year. It was its white with purple lettering that read, "Quiet power isn't weak." As I walked the corridor toward Barrett's office, I noticed how few people made eye contact. There's a particular kind of silence that fills a building when people sense blood in the water but don't want to get wet. When I stepped inside, he was standing, hands clasped behind his back, smile thin and gleaming like a polished dagger. "Nova," he said smoothly, "thanks for coming." I didn't respond, just nodded once and took the empty seat in front of his desk. He launched in without hesitation. "We've completed the leadership reorganization, and after careful consideration, he always made sure to say, careful, like it mattered. We've decided to move forward without your role. No, thank you for your service. No acknowledgement of the software, the strategy, the saved quarter. Just a blunt knife slid under the ribs." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice like he was offering wisdom. "You'll be remembered as someone dependable," he said, "but small. You lacked scale." That was the moment I felt it, not rage, not grief. Relief. A strange, beautiful release inside me, like something tight had finally snapped. I didn't argue. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him and said, "Thank you for the clarity." It caught him off guard just for a second. His mouth twitched. He pushed a folder across the desk. "HR has your severance details. Your system access ends at 5:00 p.m. I'm sure you'll land somewhere." "Steady." I reached into my bag, pulled out the mug, and tucked it beside my photo frame. The one of my mother standing beneath the Orion Grid launch banner scissors, mid-cut her hand resting on my small shoulder. Barrett didn't even glance at it. I rose, straightened my coat, and extended a hand. He shook it, brief, cool, mechanical. As I stepped into the hallway, the air felt heavier than before, like the building itself knew something had shifted. I passed Lana near the elevators. She was pretending to check her phone, but I saw the way her fingers trembled slightly. She didn't look up, didn't speak. We had once shared midnight ramen over client disaster calls, cried laughing over broken prototypes, promised we'd always have each other's backs. Now she couldn't meet my eyes. I paused just long enough to say it. Not cruel, just final. "You made your choice." Her head tilted almost imperceptibly, but she didn't answer. The elevator doors opened. I stepped in alone. By the time I reached the ground floor, the sky had opened up outside Seattle. Rain. Thin, constant half-whispering. I didn't open my umbrella. Didn't run for cover. I stepped into the downpour, slowly, deliberately. My heels clicked against the sidewalk. My bag hung light against my shoulder. The mug warmed slightly in my hand from where I'd been holding it close. The storm behind me was still raging, but inside stillness, because the world thought I had just lost everything. But what they didn't know, what Barrett didn't know, was that he had just handed me the cleanest exit possible. No baggage, no contracts to untangle, no blood on my hands. Only silence and a storm of my own quietly building. Tuesday morning, 9:57 a.m. Barrett thought he was about to run a quarterly strategy review. He was dressed for it too. Navy three-piece no tie, that power watch he only wore when he wanted to look presidential. I heard later he even rehearsed a joke about visionaries and the road ahead. Let him rehearse, because what was waiting for him wasn't a review. It was a reckoning. I arrived 2 minutes early. Security didn't question me. The receptionist blinked twice but said nothing. I walked through the familiar glass doors of Orion Grid with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to claim. Mr. Harrington met me by the elevator. He carried a leather briefcase and wore a smile so slight it was almost imperceptible. "They're all inside," he said. "He started early. Thought it made him look driven. Let him drive into a wall," I replied. He didn't laugh, but his eyes said he wanted to. The elevator doors opened. As we reached the 22nd floor, I could already hear Barrett's voice reverberating through the frosted glass, loud, animated, drowning in self-congratulation. The uptick in retention is a testament to our aggressive reshaping of internal priorities. He was saying, pacing at the head of the boardroom, like he owned the oxygen in the room. I pushed the door open. Click. 12 heads turned, the room stilled. I walked in with steady steps, heels soft against the polished oak. My navy suit was the same one I'd worn the day I was fired. My mother's badge was pinned just below the lapel, and in my hands was a manila folder, thick with destiny. Barrett's voice faltered. His smile twitched. "Elena," he said, fake warmth, already cracking. "This meeting is for board members only." I placed the folder on the table and met his eyes. "Exactly," I said. "That's why I'm here." A hush fell over the room. Mr. Dalton, the oldest board member, white-haired and sharp-eyed, someone who had stood beside my mother when Orion Grid was just blueprints and rented office chairs, leaned forward and opened the folder. His eyes scanned the pages. His hand trembled slightly. "Is this?" he began. Voice dry, careful. "Is this real?" I nodded once, calm and razor-sharp. "Yes," I said, 92% of company shares legally transferred through a trust. Activated on my 30th birthday, all notarized, all filed, all valid as of today. Barrett's face drained. "You can't be serious," he snapped. This is a stunt. It's a correction," I said, "long overdue." He turned to the others. "Desperate now. You're not going to let her. This isn't leadership. It's a coup." Mr. Harrington cleared his throat gently. "As her legal counsel, I can confirm the documents are fully binding. Quinn is now the majority shareholder and has the right to call or direct board meetings, including matters of executive oversight." I leaned forward slightly, just enough to anchor the weight of the moment. "This meeting," I said, "concerns the future of Orion Grid. It concerns integrity, performance, and yes, leadership. Which is exactly why I'm here." Barrett scoffed. "You don't know the first thing about leadership. You are emotional, quiet, passive." "No," I said, voice clear as crystal. "I was strategic. I watched, I listened. And I waited while you burned, through talent, smothered innovation, and gutted the values this company was built on. I turned to the board, starting today that ends." Mr. Dalton looked back down at the trust documents, then at me. Then slowly, deliberately, he closed the folder and nodded. "Motion acknowledged," he said. Barrett's chair screeched as he stood up. Hands clenched, eyes wild. "You'll regret this." I didn't blink. "You've confused silence for weakness," I said. "But silence is just a weapon you never saw coming." The silence after I spoke was thick, not awkward heavy, the kind that shifts something in the air like a storm just before it breaks. I turned toward the panel on the wall and tapped the projector remote. The screen behind me flickered to life. "This isn't personal," I said, my voice steady but firm. "This is data. Slide 1 employee turnover, 18 months. The line climbed sharply upward since Barrett assumed his role. Voluntary departures have increased by 47%. That includes engineers, developers, account managers, many with 10 or more years of service. Exit interviews cited toxic leadership, fear-based culture, and lack of recognition as recurring themes. Slide 2. HR complaint log, flagged incidents. 4 formal harassment reports were submitted over the last year. All 4 were quietly closed without escalation. 3 were filed against the same executive, 2 involved threats tied to performance reviews. Not one of them reached this board. Murmurs, shifts in chairs. Barrett crossed his arms. "You're spinning facts." I met his gaze unwavering. "I'm presenting truth." Slide 3, client loss. Apex Energy termination. The screen displayed an email chain highlighted in yellow. The final line from the client's VP of Operations read, "We're pulling out of our contract early. We no longer trust Orion Grid's leadership culture to align with our values." A single sentence. A $6 million partnership gone. I clicked the remote once more, letting the final slide fade in. A simple black screen. White text center aligned. Leadership isn't control through fear. It's creating a space where people grow. I turned back to the board. I didn't come here for revenge. I came for accountability, Barrett laughed, sharp, bitter, unhinged. You came here to make a point. Congratulations, you're CEO now. Good luck holding it together with a bunch of coddled employees and weak systems. I ignored him. This vote isn't about power. It's about preservation. I glanced at Mr. Dalton. His jaw was tight, his fingers drumming slowly against the table's edge. I looked across the boardroom. People I'd worked under. People I'd tried for years to earn respect from. No one wanted it to get here, I said. But here we are. You've seen the numbers, the damage, the silence you all sat through while this man turned leadership into theater. I reached into my folder and pulled out the final document. Simple 1 page, as majority shareholder. I said, I'm calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in Barrett Quinn as CEO of Orion Grid effective upon vote confirmation. Barrett stood. This is a witch hunt, he growled. It's baseless. It's childish. You're emotional. No, I said coldly. I'm done being silent. I placed the paper in front of Mr. Dalton. He read it quietly, then looked up at me and nodded. Motion recorded, he said. And with your 92% shareholding. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Barrett looked around, waiting for someone to speak on his behalf. No one did. He stared at me one last time, fury burning behind his eyes. You'll regret this. I didn't move, didn't blink. Maybe I said, but at least I'll be able to sleep at night. He turned and stormed out, and when the door slammed behind him, the room didn't breathe. It exhaled. The email went out just after sunrise. All staff meeting, 9:00 a.m. Main hall, attendance encouraged. No subject line, no explanation. Just that. By the time I stepped onto the stage, the space was already filled. Rows upon rows of employees in branded jackets. Faded name badges, coffee in hand. Some looked confused, others wary, a few hopeful. The lights above were too bright. The mic hummed. My heart beat loud in my chest, but my voice when it came was steady. I was fired. I began because I didn't fit their idea of leadership. The room went still. I was told I was too quiet, too careful, that I lacked vision. I let that settle for a second. No slides, no stats, just air between us. But I didn't come back to talk about that. I took a breath, looked across the sea of tired faces, most of them strangers, but all of them familiar in the ways that mattered. I came back because I do fit something else. You! That was the first shift. The collective exhale, the lift in posture, the unsaid thought. She sees us. I came back, I said, because I'm like you. I've stayed late. I've cleaned up messes that weren't mine. I've watched credit get handed to someone louder. I've bitten my tongue in meetings. I've walked hallways where no one looked up. Silence again. A few glances, eyes blinking harder than usual. I want to tell you a story. I continued. 2 months ago, a janitor named Eric was replacing a light in the east stairwell. I was coming down the stairs with my laptop open, stressed, rushing, and I almost walked right past him. But something made me stop. I said, "Good morning." That's it. Just 2 words. I paused. He started crying. A murmur rippled across the room. I asked him what was wrong. He said no one had spoken to him. Not a greeting, not a thank you for 8. He said he thought maybe he didn't exist. I swallowed. The lump in my throat threatened to crack my composure, but he does exist, just like you do, and I see you. Something broke open then. A clap, then another. And then it spread thunderous applause, the kind that carries not just noise, but relief. It wasn't for me. It was for them, for finally being seen, for finally mattering. I let it wash over us before I raised a hand gently to speak again, starting today. Orion Grid isn't just a tech company. It's a people company. We rebuild from the inside out together. There were smiles, real ones. Some people stood, some cried. It was the first time in years this building had felt alive. I'll be in the cafeteria this afternoon. No schedule, no layers. Just me and a notebook. Tell me what you need. Tell me what you've never been asked. We start with listening, more claps, more hope. In the front row, a young developer with ink-stained fingers whispered to a coworker, "We're back." And for the first time since my mother died, I believed it. The first thing I did was bring back the mural. It had been painted in the west stairwell during Orion Grid's 5th year in business. A sweeping blend of colors, circuitry, and silhouettes of real employees from that era. My mother had commissioned it as a tribute to the invisible hands behind every breakthrough Barrett had it painted over. "Too messy," he said. Not aligned with the new brand, but now the wall was alive again. We found the original artist, an employee and smelly from facilities, now semi-retired, and gave her full reign. She cried when we handed her the brush. The second thing I did was launch Silent Gratitude Week. No emails, no stage speeches, no grandstanding, just handwritten thank you notes. Supervisors wrote them for janitors. Designers wrote them for IT, marketing assistant, left one taped to the break room fridge. To whoever keeps the oat milk stocked. "Thank you, I notice, I appreciate you." They multiplied like stars. And slowly the cold in the building began to thaw. One morning, Maya walked back in. Her ID badge had long been deactivated. Her office cleared out under Barrett's restructure. But when I called her and said simply, "We need you," she didn't hesitate. She returned to her old desk, paused for a moment to take it in, and then got to work, like she'd never left her new title, Director of Employee Culture. She was the soul of this place, and I was done letting anyone erase that again. Then came Kevin, the engineer. Barrett had dismissed as too principled for innovation, the man who had quietly created the framework for Novacell's success and then watched it credited to someone else. I called him the day after my hall speech. He answered on the second ring. "Nova." His voice held disbelief. "We've got work to do," I said. "You in?" He didn't even pause. Now he leads R&D, innovation, consulting, mentoring, rebuilding. Every week, he leaves a note on my desk with 2 bullet points. One breakthrough, one shout-out to someone who helped him get there. The third week, he wrote, "Breakthrough. We cracked thermal latency credits Sophia in QA who stayed late even, though no one asked her to. These things, they matter. We didn't overhaul the company overnight, but we rewired its heart. And slowly that mattered more than any quarterly graph. There was a Tuesday afternoon, just a normal day. No speeches or meetings, when I got into the elevator, and an intern stood beside me. She looked about 22, nervous, holding a box of prototype samples. As the doors closed, she glanced up and said softly, "I used to think no one saw us. Until you spoke, I didn't know her name. But I smiled and said, 'Now I always will.'" Back in my office, a note sat folded on my desk. No signature, no flourish. Just a sentence scribbled in neat, careful handwriting. "You didn't just save the company. You saved us." I stood there for a long time holding it, not because it was poetic, but because it was true. We weren't just fixing systems, we were healing people, and that was the kind of legacy my mother would have believed in. Exactly 1 year later, I stood at the top of Orion Grid's headquarters, this time as its CEO. The office hadn't changed much since I'd last stood in it as an employee, but everything felt different. The energy was warmer now, more alive. The walls didn't echo anymore. They listened. Sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the room in that golden hush you only get right after dawn. Outside, the city stretched wide and quiet, just beginning to stir. Inside, the only sound was the soft hum of the monitor behind me. Q4 report revenue, plus 42%. Retention, up 61%. I read the numbers twice, not for validation, but to feel them, because they weren't just metrics anymore. They were proof. Proof that rebuilding with empathy didn't mean weakness. Proof that slow, steady leadership could outrun noise and ego. Proof that a company could be both human and high-performing. I turned it around and looked at the frame on the wall behind my desk. My mother's portrait hung there now. It wasn't a formal photo. No staged boardroom setting, no executive pose, just a candid shot of her smiling during the first product demo, wind blowing a few strands of hair across her cheek, her eyes crinkling with that signature spark. It had been taken the day she landed our first client, when Orion Grid was still operating out of a rented shipping container. It had hung in the old lobby once. Barrett had it taken down. Now it watched over everything again. I stepped closer, ran my fingers gently along the edge of the frame. "We did it," I whispered. "No fanfare, no audience, just me, her, and the morning light. We're home, Mom. We're whole again," and we were, because Orion Grid wasn't broken anymore. Its people were thriving, its culture was breathing, its mission was back on track, not just to build cleaner tech, but to build it with purpose. This place that once made me feel invisible had become the very stage where I learned to stand tall. And now I didn't need to be loud. I didn't need to be flashy. I just needed to be here, quietly leading, fiercely watching, listening harder than I spoke. That was enough. That was everything. My name is Naomi Hale, and until recently, I held the title of Senior Systems Architect at Strathmore Dynamics. For over a decade, I poured my life into that company, building the frameworks that carried projects worth billions. My work was praised in quarterly reports, my loyalty taken for granted. And yet, beneath the polished surface, cracks were always there. Cracks I didn't want to see, until one night. They split wid. It was late, long after the last employees had gone home. I returned to the office because I'd left my laptop in the conference room. Without it. Tomorrow's pitch deck, the one I'd refined for weeks, wouldn't exist. The halls were quiet, lit only by the cold glow of emergency lights. My heels clicked softly against the tiles as I walked, rehearsing slides in my head. When I reached the boardroom, I tried the handle. The door gave way instantly. It wasn't locked. Inside. The sight stopped me cold. Before I take you deeper into what I saw in that room, let me pause for a second to check in with you. How are you doing today? Remember, not every hour needs to be about work. Don't push yourself too hard. Your health comes first. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know. And if this story has already pulled you in, don't forget to gently tap that like button and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Now, back to that boardroom, because what I witnessed next left me breathless. Daniel Mercer, my CEO, the man who demanded perfection from every late-night report, was standing far too close to a young associate. His arms encircled her waist, his mouth brushing her neck, her blouse half open as if the walls of the company's most important room gave them permission. The same glass table where I'd fought to defend budgets, where I'd earned my stripes, now played stage to their intimacy. I couldn't move. My face burned, not from desire, but from humiliation. Humiliation that I had worked myself raw while this was what determined careers. Then, a sharp sound, fabric snapping. Something rolled across the carpet. I glanced down. A button, pearl white, glossy, spun to a stop right at my shoe. The room tilted around me. My breath caught in my chest, my body rigid in the doorway. They hadn't even noticed me, so consumed by themselves. But I knew. I knew that this moment, absurd and sordid as it was, would mark the beginning of the end, not just for me, but eventually for him. That button lay at my feet like a clue, a token of betrayal, and as I stared at it, I realized my career wasn't collapsing by accident. It was being buried under his arrogance, his secrets, and his affair. The image from the boardroom clung to me like smoke. I tried to shake it off, to bury myself in work, but nothing felt steady anymore. The button at my feet, the sound of their laughter, it all kept replaying in my head. I told myself I had imagined it, that exhaustion had blurred the edges of reality. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I forced myself back into routine. I dressed as though nothing had happened, slipped on my blazer, and told myself I'd keep my head down. For 12 years. I had been the senior systems architect, the one who stayed late, who solved problems no one else dared to touch. If I focused on that, maybe the chaos in my mind would quiet. But by mid-morning, my carefully built facade cracked. An email landed in my inbox. Subject line, plain as stone. Meeting follow-up. I almost ignored it until I saw the sender. Daniel Mercer, my CEO, the man from last night. I opened it with trembling hands. The words didn't belong to me. Last night was worth every risk. Seeing you against that conference table. Knowing the company bends because of us. It makes me believe no one can touch us. Wear the watch tonight. It reminds me you're mine. I read it twice. Then a third time. My heart pounding harder with each pass. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't spam. The header carried his digital seal. He had meant to send this to her, not to me. The room tilted. My throat tightened. I minimized the screen, then reopened it, desperate to believe the words might vanish. They didn't. They burned brighter. I shut my office door and leaned against it, fighting for air. This wasn't just an affair. It was proof of favoritism, of corruption hiding behind closed blinds, promotions, assignments, decisions. Suddenly, they all looked tainted. All those nights I spent hunched over data sheets, all the holidays I had sacrificed, while she was handed shortcuts carved out by desire. Questions flooded me. How long had this been going on? Did anyone else know? Had HR signed off blindly? Or were they complicit? Every whisper in the hallway felt sharper now, every glance heavier. I started seeing conspiracy in every corner. For a moment, I thought about deleting the email, pretending it never existed, but my hands moved differently. I copied it into a hidden directory buried deep in my drive, a private vault I had created years ago for sensitive drafts, my insurance. Still, the turmoil wouldn't let me breathe. I tried to focus on meetings, but my mind drifted back to the email again and again. The phrase "the company bends because of us" rang in my ears like a taunt. As I left for the day, I caught sight of Marissa from HR. She clutched a red-tabbed folder against her chest, her eyes flicking toward me, then darting away. Her face carried a tension I couldn't name, but it fueled the storm already raging inside me. Something more was coming. I could feel it. And the next time Daniel called me into his office, the humiliation would no longer be imagined. It would be delivered face to face. The summons came without warning. Daniel's assistant appeared at my door just before noon, saying, "He wants you in the conference room, now." Her voice was flat, her eyes unreadable. I gathered my notes, half expecting this to be about system updates or the next investor deck. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt the shift. The room was too quiet, too staged. Daniel sat at the head of the table, arms folded, his expression carved from stone. Marissa from HR was there too, her folder perched neatly on her lap. She didn't look at me. "Naomi," Daniel began, not even bothering with pleasantries. "We've decided to move in a different direction." The words hit me like a slap. "I don't understand." He didn't hesitate. "Your performance has plateaued. You lack creativity. Effective immediately. Your employment is terminated." The silence that followed was deafening. Lack of creativity? I stared at him, stunned, trying to reconcile the absurdity. I had designed the system that secured $3.9 billion in revenue, the architecture that had been hailed as visionary in the last investor call. That was my work, my innovation, my nights and weekends, my sacrifice. "Lack of creativity?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "The system you're still selling to global clients is mine. Every line of its backbone is my design." Daniel's eyes narrowed. A flicker of something, fear, passing quickly before his smirk returned. "You've done well in the past, but this company needs fresh blood. HR will handle your exit." My gaze shifted to Marissa. She kept her head down, flipping through her folder like a machine. She didn't defend me, didn't speak. Her silence was as loud as his arrogance. I felt the room closing in, the weight of betrayal pressing hard against my chest. After 12 years. This was how it ended? Cast aside in a 5-minute meeting, dismissed as if I had contributed nothing, while his affair lingered like a shadow over the table? I clenched my fists to keep from shaking. Every instinct told me to fight, to throw the truth in his face, the email, the watch, the button at my feet. But I stayed silent. Not out of fear, out of calculation, because in that moment, I realized something. The more he spoke, the deeper he buried himself. Lack of creativity wasn't just an insult, it was a paper trail. It would be written, recorded, documented, proof that he was discarding the very person who had built the crown jewel of Strathmore dynamics. When the meeting ended, Daniel dismissed me with a flick of his hand. Already turning to the next agenda item, Marissa rose quietly, her folder pressed tight against her chest. For the first time, she looked at me, not with pity, but with something else, a flicker of hesitation, maybe guilt. I walked out of that room feeling stripped of dignity, every step echoing humiliation, yet beneath the burn of betrayal, a seed of resolve had taken root, because I knew the truth, and I suspected Marissa did too. And soon, I would learn just how much she was willing to reveal. I spent the rest of that day in a fog, packing my desk slowly, as though dragging out each movement might keep me tethered a little longer. I couldn't bear the stares of colleagues who avoided my eyes, nor the silence of those who knew better than to speak. I told myself this was the end, that Daniel had won. But late in the afternoon, as I slipped my last folder into a box, a quiet knock came at my door. It was Evelyn from HR, the only person in that department I had ever trusted. She closed the door behind her, her expression tense. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, "but you need to know what's happening." I froze, waiting. She set a slim envelope on my desk. "The woman replacing you, her appointment was rushed, signed off almost immediately after those late-night messages." My heart stumbled. Messages? Her eyes flicked up to mine. She didn't have to explain. She knew. Somehow. She knew about the email I'd received, about the affair I had witnessed. She leaned closer. "Naomi, this wasn't standard procedure. Normally a role like yours requires 3 levels of review, sometimes even board involvement. But this," she tapped the envelope, "this was pushed through by Daniel alone." I slid the papers out with shaking hands. At the top was the formal appointment of my replacement, effective the day after the boardroom encounter. And there, at the bottom, was Daniel's signature, hurried, messy. Nothing like the deliberate strokes he usually prided himself on. It was proof, a small crack in his armor, but proof nonetheless. A fragile thread of hope wound its way through my chest. For the first time since that button rolled to my feet, I felt less like a victim and more like someone holding a weapon, even if it was small. Evelyn's voice dropped. "I made a copy. They don't know I have it. Keep it safe." She hesitated, then added, "You weren't fired for performance, Naomi. You were fired to make room." I clutched the papers, my pulse racing. My humiliation hadn't been meaningless. It had been strategic, and that realization shifted everything. Because if one document could prove his corruption, what else was waiting to be uncovered? What do you think happens next? Will Naomi finally unleash everything she's holding back? Or will Daniel find a way to tighten his grip first? Drop your guesses in the comments. I'd love to hear how you see this playing out. And stay with me until the very end, because something truly unexpected is about to turn this entire story upside down. I told myself I wouldn't look for him, that I would try to move on, rebuild quietly, let the humiliation settle into silence. But anger has a way of rewriting your choices. It seeps into your skin until the only relief is action. 2 nights after Evelyn slipped me the copy of the rushed appointment, I found myself in the lobby of the Westmont Hotel. It wasn't planned. I had gone there to meet an old colleague for drinks. But fate, cruel and precise, put me in the right place at the right time. Across the bar, tucked into a corner booth, sat Daniel Mercer, and next to him, pressed close, was the young associate who now wore the title that used to be mine. Her laughter floated over the clinking of glasses, light and easy, while his hand rested casually over hers. I froze, my stomach twisting, but this time I didn't retreat. Rage steadied me. I slipped my phone from my bag, angling it carefully. The camera clicked, capturing their faces side by side. My pulse thundered, but I forced myself to stay calm. Then the waiter arrived with their check. I watched as Daniel handed over his black corporate card, the same card tied to Strathmore Dynamics. My jaw clenched. Dinner, drinks, even her carefully staged smile. It was all being funded by the company, by the clients whose contracts I had negotiated, the systems I had built. I stood, moving casually toward the exit, and on my way past their booth. I snapped a second photo, close enough to catch the edge of the receipt as it slid across the table. The total glared back, bold and unmistakable, with Strathmore Dynamics Corporate stamped in neat black letters. But it was the reflection that sealed it. In the wide mirror behind them, the image doubled back. Daniel, smirking, her leaning in close, and on her wrist, a gleaming watch. Not just any watch, the same luxury brand he had mentioned in that email. The one he told her to wear, because it proves you're mine. My hands tightened around my phone. This wasn't rumor, this wasn't suspicion, it was evidence. Corporate money funding an affair, lavish gifts disguised as expenses, proof strong enough to raise questions no PR team could bury. I walked out of the hotel bar with my chest pounding, but for the first time, my humiliation didn't weigh me down. It sharpened into resolve. He thought firing me would erase me. Instead, it had freed me to see everything clearly. As I stepped into the night air, my phone buzzed with a message. It was Evelyn again. We need to talk. I found something else. And just like that, I knew the pieces were falling into place, and Daniel Mercer had no idea how close his empire was to collapse. By the time I returned home from the Westmont Hotel, my anger had cooled into something sharper. Rage burns out quickly, but strategy lasts. I spread everything across my dining table: papers, printouts, screenshots, photographs, like puzzle pieces waiting to be aligned. First came the email, the one never meant for me. Daniel's words were still etched into my memory. The company bends because of us. I printed it, headers and all, sealing it in a protective sleeve. It wasn't just a love note. It was a confession that business decisions were being warped by his affair. Then Evelyn's gift, the appointment papers of my replacement. The ink of his rushed signature looked sloppier each time I studied it. Combined with her testimony about the unusual speed, it was clear this wasn't policy. It was panic. Finally, the photos from the hotel bar, Daniel's arm around her, the receipt with Strathmore Dynamics Corporate stamped at the bottom, and the mirror reflection of the watch glinting on her wrist. Together, they screamed of misused company funds, ethics violations, and favoritism. One by one, I slid the documents into my hidden vault folder, encrypted and duplicated to an external drive. Years of building secure systems had taught me the value of redundancy. If Daniel thought firing me had cut me off, he had forgotten that knowledge doesn't vanish with a title. Still, I wasn't finished. My gut told me there was another thread. So I dug deeper into the HR database, pulling archived employment contracts. And there it was, the final piece I hadn't expected. Her contract, signed, dated, and made effective the exact same day I had stumbled into that boardroom after hours. The night I found Daniel and her together. I stared at the screen, my breath slow and steady. It was too neat, too perfectly aligned to be coincidence. He hadn't just promoted her quickly. He had prepared her contract the same day their affair crossed the line into something undeniable. It was sloppy, it was arrogant, and it was the kind of mistake that could unravel everything. I leaned back in my chair, letting the realization settle. For weeks, I had felt powerless, discarded, humiliated. But now I held the narrative in my hands. The question was no longer whether I could bring him down. It was how and when. As I shut down my laptop, my phone buzzed again. A calendar alert I hadn't expected. Strathmore's annual gala. Just 3 nights away. The perfect stage. The perfect audience. And suddenly, I knew exactly where this was heading. Whispers have a way of carrying in an office, even when no one wants them to. I returned to Strathmore under the guise of clearing out my desk completely. But what I really wanted was to listen. And I didn't have to wait long. By the coffee machine, 2 analysts spoke in hushed voices. "She's barely been here a year," one murmured, "and she's already leapfrogged to senior leadership?" "It doesn't make sense," the other whispered back. "Unless there's something else. Stay." Their words trailed off when they noticed me passing by. But the glance they exchanged told me they suspected more than they dared to say aloud. The tension in my chest tightened. It wasn't just me anymore. The cracks were visible to others, too. Later that afternoon, as I sorted files in a small conference room, the door clicked shut behind me. I turned to see Victor, a mid-level manager I'd worked with for years. His face was pale, his voice low. "I shouldn't be doing this," he said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "But I can't watch this company rot." My fingers hesitated. "What is it?" "Expense reports, travel costs. Look closely at the last line items." I opened the file on my laptop, my heart thudding. And there it was. Company funds allocated for a client development trip to Barcelona. Airfare, luxury hotel, spa charges, 2 tickets, 2 names. Not clients, not partners. Daniel Mercer and his newly appointed senior associate. I scrolled further. Bile rising in my throat. Paris, Dubai, Singapore, each marked as business development, each funded by Strathmore's accounts, each nothing more than a private vacation. Victor leaned closer. "If this leaks, it won't just raise questions, it will burn him." I exhaled slowly, forcing calm into my voice. "Why give this to me?" He met my eyes. Steady. "Because you built this place. Naomi, you deserve the truth more than anyone. And because I trust you to know when to use it." The weight of the files pressed heavy on me. This wasn't rumor anymore. It was proof layered on top of proof. A dam ready to burst. But even as I closed the folder, another fear crept in. If Victor could access this, Daniel would soon realize there were leaks. He would start hunting. And I was the most obvious target. That night, I sat at my desk at home, staring at the growing archive of evidence, the email, the appointment papers, the bar photos, the expense scans. Each piece sharpened the picture. Each piece brought me closer to exposing him. And then my eyes caught the reminder glowing on my calendar. Annual gala, 3 days. The stage was nearly set. The only question left was whether I could survive long enough to step onto it. The days leading up to the gala felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, wind whipping at my back, waiting for the push. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened. Every email notification made me flinch. I was holding too many secrets, and one wrong move could crush me. But silence was no longer an option. I sat at my kitchen table, the evidence laid out across my laptop screen. The email, the rushed appointment papers, the bar photographs, Victor's expense reports. Each piece was heavy, dangerous. But together, they told a story even Strathmore's board couldn't ignore. The question wasn't whether to use them. It was how. At midnight, I created an anonymous account routed through layers of encryption. I drafted a message to the internal audit team. Irregularities in executive spending. Conflict of interest in leadership appointments. Attached. You'll find samples. Investigate before the gala. My hands trembled as I attached only a fraction of what I had, just enough to plant suspicion, to make the walls tremble, not enough to expose my identity. When I hit send, the silence that followed was deafening, but I wasn't finished. I selected 2 photographs, the booth at the Westmont Hotel and the mirrored reflection of the watch, and slipped them anonymously to a well-known financial journalist. No names, no explanations, just a line. Follow the money. It leads to Strathmore Dynamics. The moment I sent them, panic wrapped around my chest like a vice. What if the trail led back to me? What if Daniel discovered my hidden vault? I paced the apartment, my phone clutched in my hand, convinced each vibration would announce my exposure. By morning, the whispers had started. Colleagues exchanged nervous looks in the lobby. Rumors of audit flags and unexplained charges circled like vultures. In the financial press, a speculative article appeared. Unusual executive spending at Strathmore? No proof, no conclusions, just enough to stir curiosity. Exactly as I intended. Still, the pressure was unbearable. Every hallway glance felt sharper. Every half-smile from Daniel's loyalists seemed like a threat. He hadn't confronted me yet, but I could feel him circling, waiting for the source of the leak to surface. I kept my head down, forcing myself to breathe. No one knew it was me, not yet. But the clock was ticking. The gala was tomorrow night, and if I wanted the truth to explode in the open, I had to be ready to stand in the middle of the fire. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and champagne glasses, every corner polished to perfection. Strathmore's annual gala was always a performance, a place where Daniel Mercer loved to parade success before investors and press. Tonight, I stood at the edge of the crowd, my heart thudding, waiting for the show to begin. The speeches dragged on, one executive after another offering rehearsed praise. Then Daniel took the stage. He was calm, smiling, his arm briefly brushing the young associates as she adjusted the microphone. He thanked the board, the clients, the employees, spinning the same visionary script he had repeated for years. And then the lights dimmed. The projector flickered to life. At first, it looked like another investor reel, until the first image filled the screen. There they were, Daniel and his associate in that Westmont booth, his hand resting over hers, her wrist gleaming with the luxury watch. Across the bottom of the photo, enlarged for all to see, the corporate receipt glared. Strathmore Dynamics corporate account. The room froze. Forks clattered against plates. A gasp cut through the silence. Then another. Investors craned their necks, their whispers rising like static. Daniel's smile faltered before he could speak. The next slide appeared. Expense reports with highlighted totals, travel destinations, and his name paired with hers. Barcelona, Paris, Dubai, each stamped with the company's ledger. The air grew heavy. My pulse pounded, but I felt a rush of vindication. Every sleepless night, every humiliation. I had waited for this moment. Daniel tried to step forward, his voice breaking through the chaos. This is taken out of context. But then a new voice rang out. Clear, firm. Evelyn from HR walked onto the stage, a folder in her hands. She faced the crowd, her voice steady through the microphone. All of the recent appointments, including the promotion of his associate, were approved by Daniel alone. They bypassed required reviews. They were not based on merit. They were based on personal relations. The ballroom erupted. Gasps turned to outrage. Investors shouted across tables, demanding answers. Reporters scrambled for cameras. I watched Daniel's face drain of color as his empire cracked under the weight of truth. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. Justice wasn't whispered anymore. It was projected on 10-foot screens, confirmed by his own people. And as security began to move toward the stage, I knew his downfall had only just begun. The morning after the gala, the air around Strathmore Dynamics felt different, charged, unsettled. The once untouchable walls seemed smaller now, their shine dulled by the weight of scandal. I walked out of the building one final time, a box of belongings balanced in one arm, and in my other hand, a velvet case. The case had been discovered in Evelyn's folder after the chaos of last night. Inside sat the very watch Daniel had paraded on his associate's wrist, purchased with company money, wrapped in deceit. To the world it was luxury, to me, it was proof, a glittering artifact of arrogance. I stopped just outside the glass doors, where the street met the edge of the company's property. The morning sun glinted off the case as I opened it one last time. The watch caught the light, flawless, perfect, but all I could see was corruption staring back at me. For a moment, I held it in my palm, feeling the full weight of what it represented. Betrayal, humiliation, the months of sacrifice that had been cheapened by his affair. Then a calm settled over me. This wasn't mine to keep. It was never mine to carry. I walked to the storm drain by the curb. Without ceremony, without hesitation, I dropped the watch through the grate. It clattered once against the metal and disappeared into the darkness below. Just like that, it was gone. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because as that watch sank out of sight, so did the last remnants of Daniel Mercer's career and reputation. The empire he had built on lies and lust was now crumbling, and I was finally free. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. Justice had been served, not through anger, but through patience, precision, and truth. And if you take anything from my story, let it be this: dignity can be stolen, but it can also be reclaimed. No betrayal, no arrogance, no abuse of power lasts forever. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when buried deep. What about you? How do you think you would have fought back in my place? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story resonated, give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story of quiet revenge and justice served.